What a week. What a week. Last Shabbat, we were joined for some wonderful teaching and learning by Melila Helner Eshet, a dear friend of Rabbi Sager, Zichrono Levracha. On Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, our Beit Midrash was filled. 25, 30 people gathered around, first in here for davening, then some nice breakfast, and then learning on the theme of Zocher Chastei Avot V'Imahot, on God as remembering the loving deeds of our ancestors. First day, the loving deeds of our biological ancestors, then our spiritual ancestors, those people who made us who we are. And then the last day, thinking about how is it that we can prepare ourselves to become ancestors, people of whom will be thought when we say prayers. It was a wonderful week of learning, and I want to say that there is more to come. I want to thank Eric Myers ahead of time. He is teaching a class beginning tomorrow morning from the Bible to the Mishnah, and there are more than 30 people signed up for the class. It will be in the Beit Midrash. On February 9th, I will start teaching a Talmud class. It's not going to be every Thursday, but a series of Thursdays this spring, and I'm hoping that it will be something that continues for many years. We'll be learning the third chapter of Masechet Moed Katan, in which the rabbis discuss the laws of mourning. And there's always more learning going on here. By the way, we also had a Mishnah class, 8:45 to 9:30. So we do that every Shabbat morning. We go from the Mishnah to the Torah, and you can learn from Eric how to go from the Torah to the Mishnah. I want to talk about one phrase from this week's Parsha, in case you wonder why you can spend so much time studying Torah. This one phrase, Vayamesh Choshech. We learn about the darkness, Vayamesh Choshech. It was Vayamesh, God, Vayamesh. What is this word? There are two streams of thought about what it means. The first one says that it's from this idea of mamash, right? Something which is mamash is material, it's palpable. You can feel it. It has something to it. And from this, many translations will say that the darkness that came over Egypt was a darkness that could be felt. Right? By the way, if you want to read these stories, I don't recommend only reading them that way, but the Eitz Chaim supplies a naturalistic explanation, which is that if this story of darkness was based upon, it might have been based on a sandstorm which came over Egypt and blotted out the sun. And if it's a sandstorm, then by the way, wow, how palpable that would have been, right? You could feel the sand in the air. And maybe that's what it referred to, but I don't think you need that. Theologically, we can also remember that the chief Egyptian god was the sun god, Ra, and that this darkness is saying ultimately that Pharaoh, you and your people's God have no real power. It can be blotted out with a darkness, again, that is palpable. And last year, by the way, one other thought about that, Dr. Harold Cudler gave a wonderful Devar Torah about this Parsha, where many people understand that darkness to refer psychologically to depression, where one has a feeling of sadness and darkness that is so deep, because remember what the Torah says is that for 3 days people couldn't move. And I want you to know, I think, take this moment just to say, there are people in our congregation and people all over the country and all over the world who are stricken with the disease of depression, where sometimes there's so much darkness and sadness that it's hard to move. It's difficult to move, and that darkness feels heavy, vayamash, right? It's palpable. But a whole other way of reading it, Rashi's first explanation, he brings you the second one, but his first explanation, Rashi says it's Lashon Hasara, which means it's the language of removing. removing. And you know this verb. We're going to sing it in a few minutes. Ledor vador nagid godlecha, lenetzach netzachim kiddushatcha nagdish. From generation to generation, we will tell of your greatness, and we will sanctify you. V'shivchacha mipinu lo yamush. And may your praises from our mouths, lo yamush, never depart, never be removed, never go away. Yamush, a whole other stream of commentary says that when it says vayamesh choshech, that God removed the darkness. But wait a minute, I thought it was a plague of darkness. How could it be removing the darkness? The answer is, remember that there was light for where all of the Israelites were. And so God removed the darkness from where the Israelites were and put a double dose of darkness on the Egyptians so that it was dark where they were and light where the Israelites were. Okay? I share this, number one, because there are many faces of Torah, and we should, the answer to that question I don't think has been resolved. And the importance of this is not that is not whether we accept a naturalistic explanation or a supernatural explanation, not whether we're looking for a psychological reading of it, that it's about depression, or whether we're looking at a theological reading of it, that it's against the Egyptian gods. Ultimately, the purpose of the Exodus narrative in which we are immersed right now, God says over and over again, is so that you will tell the story. There's a commandment, yes, to enact the paschal sacrifice in the land of Egypt at that moment, what the sages call Pesach Mitzrayim, but there's also Pesach Lidorot. At the same moment as this is happening, as the narrative is happening, we're being told to tell the story of what's happening in the future. Tell the story about it. And what is the ultimate story? I want to argue, I'm going to tell you a little bit of our learning from the Mishnah and how maybe it connects to the ultimate story that we are telling this morning. In Mishnah, we were learning Masechet Brachot, and we asked the question, if you have to say the Shema in the morning, what's the earliest moment when you can say the Shema? There are different opinions. One of them says, the sages say, when you can tell the difference between blue and white. Rabbi Eliezer comes along and says, it's when you can tell the difference between blue and green. By the way, which one, if you weren't in the Mishnah class, which one is later? Blue and green, because the colors are much more similar to each other and you need more light, right, to tell the difference between blue and green. Rabbi Eliezer, by the way, has this idea that that's the beginning, and the end time for saying Shema is sunrise, which means that every Jew in the world has to be an early riser, okay? The sages are more lenient. They say, no, you can have 3 hours, right? Which is how we manage to say Shema here in the morning at 9:30. That makes us, by the way, in the words of the sages, like B'nai Malachim, the children of kings, we are princes and princesses. And by the way, there's something that we miss. Okay, I want to thank Debbie for this morning, who is an early riser and watches the sunrise at that moment. And even though the sages are trying to open it up for the rest of us who aren't early risers, there's a way in which we've domesticated Shema. Right? It's very nice to say Shema here in the sanctuary, but I think that the Rabbi Eliezer is saying, no, there's something magical about proclaiming God's oneness at that amazing hour of the morning right before the sun rises. Right? That was a little aside. The other opinion in the Talmud that's brought, not when you can tell the difference between blue and white, not when you can tell the difference between blue and green, but when a person can recognize one's friend. When you can see the face of your fellow human being. And I want to say that opinion is about a larger narrative. That it is, we read in the Psalms, we lay down in tears, and joy comes in the morning. that joy in the morning, joy in the Jewish tradition, is when we can see the face of our fellow human beings. That light, that our God who brings a plague of darkness is on the side of light, that our God is on the side of paying attention to your fellow human beings. And that we celebrate a redemption when we can each notice when someone is in pain, when we can notice when someone needs us, and when we can stand before others and feel seen and heard. A last thing that I mentioned this morning is that for many of us, saying Shema, and the rabbis in some ways really made saying Shema an individual activity. It's a theological moment proclaiming God's oneness. But the origin of saying Shema may have been a much more communal activity. What do we say when we say Shema? We say, "Hear, O Israel." Who are we talking to? Okay, each one of us is Israel, but the reality is that we are talking to everybody else. And so I think the core, the beginning setting of saying Shema was being with other people and saying Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai our God. That presumes that there are other people there. Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Our God is one. That we say that in community because we feel seen and we see others, and that is where light comes from. So I bless all of us. We should. Murray, you know what? I'll take the question. Is it? Yes, and thank you for saying that. The rabbis say, if you are late, imagine you missed it, then you know what happens when you say Shema? You're saying words of Torah, okay? And it's always good to say words of Torah. So yes, any time is fine for saying Shema, and there will always be another evening and another morning to come. I bless all of us that we should have the light of seeing each other when we say Shema and at all other times. Shabbat Shalom.